Um, Good morning and good evening, depending on where you are. What I really love about these webinars that we've been hosting is it spans the globe in terms of people participating and attending. My name is Casey Foster. I'm the co-executive director of Partners for Dignity and Rights. Today's conversation is another installment in our series Corporate Accountability in Uncertain Times, where we've been bringing together human rights advocates, impacted workers, and campaigners from around the globe in conversation. So far in this series, we've discussed how corporate impunity is on the rise as global corporations are exploiting weakened regulatory systems and current events to evade human rights obligations, and how global coalitions of students, workers, and advocates are waging creative campaigns to defend basic rights and push for real corporate accountability. In today's conversation, we're honored to be joined by speakers from around the globe, some of whom have firsthand experienced harvesting and processing frankincense resin for the brand doTERRA. doTERRA is a US-based essential oils company, and we're bringing you this conversation just as their annual convention is about to take place in Salt Lake City. Last year at their convention, doTERRA founder Emily Wright said, "We pulled out of the region temporarily, but we are not giving up. We do not walk away from hard things." Well, today we'll hear from folks in Somaliland and learn if progress has been made towards the goal of remedying these harms. I see we have quite a few doTERRA wellness advocates on the call today. If any of you are interested in connecting to learn more about the legacy of doTERRA's impact in Somaliland and how women continue to be impacted and what you can do about it, please fill out the form that we're dropping in the chat now, and we'll be in touch. At Partners for Dignity and Rights, we envision a just world where everyone is treated with dignity, everyone's human needs are met, and everyone can thrive and reach their full potential. We can build this world together by addressing the harms of the past, ensuring people have a meaningful role in the decisions that shape their lives, and sharing resources equitably based on people's needs. Part of making that vision a reality is the conversation that we're sharing today as we lift up the voices of people impacted by injustice and lay the groundwork for transformational change by building a movement for human rights. As we get started, I'll remind our panelists and everyone that we do not have the interpretation on now, but we do have people who are participating who's not using English as a first language. And so we have both English and Somali speakers on today's panel. So I'll just remind everyone to speak slowly so all our participants can follow the conversation. To get into our conversation, I'd like to bring in our first question for Amina Suleiman of the Horn of Africa Charitable Organization, who has been working with the frankincense gathering communities in Somaliland for many years. Amina, can you help set the stage for this conversation and tell us a little about Somaliland and the importance of frankincense to the communities there? Sorry, I mean, yes, you're on
I
mute.
was muted. Sorry.
Now we really started. Okay.
I usually use my hands when I'm talking, which helps me to think. But now I have got this mobile holding it, so I can't use my hands, so I have to rely on my head. So basically, Somaliland is in the Horn of Africa. It was Somalia, used to be part of Somalia, but now it's Somaliland, which is the north of what used to be the north of Somalia. It's in the Horn of Africa or East Africa. And I mean, frankincense for the Somaliland harvesters and Puntland harvesters, for both of them is very important. I mean, it has been a livelihood for thousands of years. I mean, I remember when I was doing history in school, it talked about all the different civilizations have used frankincense. So there was Egyptians, Greeks, Romans, all of them. So somehow it's a commodity that has been for many years. And I mean, it has been a livelihood for many communities in Somaliland and in Puntland. It's not really easy to harvest. It's something that is not easy to harvest. It's very hard. People have to climb I mean, it's the men who harvest, who climb very tall trees, and then the women do the cleaning and the sorting. Both of the jobs are hard. They're not easy. And that's why really it's important people to respect when they're buying frankincense, to respect the prices and to respect people who do this work and have been doing it for many, many years. I don't know how long I have to answer the question, but if I go over it, please stop me.
No, that was great. Thank you so much. That was great. And with that context, our next question is going to be for Alev Erhan, of Corporate Accountability Lab. Alev, thank you for joining us. You're the principal author of a report that Corporate Accountability Lab published with the Horn of Africa charity organization in 2023 called What Price for the King of Oils? Can you break down the key findings of that report for us?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for this invitation to speak, and it's such a pleasure to share this space with so many of our partners from Somaliland. So, at Corporate Accountability Lab, we have been investigating the widespread harm that was done by doTERRA through its sourcing partner in Somaliland for at least the last 4 or 5 years. And the report we published last November consolidated many of the findings that we had, as well as was consistent with the findings of a number of independent journalists who released an award-winning documentary through Vice News and several articles published by The Guardian and the Fuller Project. So I'll try to be concise, but for at least 7 years, doTERRA purchased frankincense from a supplier company in Somaliland called Asli Mady. During this time, Asli Mady operated like and as a criminal enterprise with a man named Barkhad Hassan at its helm. So around 2014, 2015, Asli Mady was still a very new company. They were searching for buyers, and doTERRA's partnership offered it an unparalleled opportunity to grow and ultimately dominate the industry. So, in the early years of this partnership, Hassan approached harvesting communities laden with promises. Harvesters who traditionally collected resin by order were told that they would be paid a premium price for selling as much as they could possibly collect. Meanwhile, women were offered opportunities for employment, cleaning and sorting the resin, and communities were given promises of many additional benefits if they sold to doTERRA, such as wells, roads, schools, beekeeping trainings, tree conservation efforts. We've heard many things. But within 1 or 2 years, the promises began to ring pretty hollow. Harvesters were already reporting being underpaid, paid in overpriced food rather than the money that they were promised, paid in an addictive substance called khat, or sometimes not paid at all. Women were given $1 a day for grueling work in Asli Mady warehouses, which I believe other participants on the call are going to speak to in greater detail. By 2018, 2019, a lot of communities were already facing serious doubts about Hassan, but at that point, they had very few options for other buyers. And the reason for this is because Hassan, using the money that he had gotten through doTERRA, was working very hard to threaten competitors out of the market, to silence journalists and activists who spoke out against his company, and to bribe the government to facilitate his monopolization of the industry. So he quickly put the wealth he developed through this process towards countless properties for himself and his employees, who he also armed. Communities continued to sell to Asli Mady in hopes that the company would eventually pay out, but many of those communities are still waiting today. So, as we detail in our report, Hassan's properties, which include a hospital that doTERRA built under his name, according to a deed that we have seen, became the site of horrific violations against young women and girls. Our current estimate is that at least 212 young women were tricked by promises of employment, taken to these properties and other locations, and sexually assaulted, raped, forced to pose for photographs, and otherwise sexually exploited by Hassan, his associates, and others. Some of these women believe they identified government employees as well as doTERRA employees at some of these events. So, in our report, our analysis is that taken together, this exploitation amounted to forced labor as defined by the International Labor Organization. On November 1st, 2024 of last year, the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency agreed with this analysis and issued an import ban prohibiting doTERRA from bringing in resin that it purchased from Asli Medi into the United States. But that was over 10 months ago, and communities have been spending this time identifying their demands for how they would like doTERRA to compensate them for what is ultimately irreparable harm and are still waiting. So I'll stop there.
Thank you for that. And for the full report is in the chat for any attendees who would like to read the full report. Alev really detailed some of the harms outlined in the report. And when a wound is open, it has to be repaired. And so I want to turn again to Amina. Under international human rights standards, corporations have a responsibility to meaningfully address and remediate the consequences of their purchasing practices. Amina, can you share with us what the community's demands of doTERRA are to begin to repair the harm that was done?
The community demands for the terror to repair the damages they have done through their exploitations. There were many damages. It's the women who have been sexually assaulted, number one, the women who have sorters who have not been paid their wages, the harvesters who haven't been paid for the resins, the trees that have been damaged, the forest, that the trees in the forest and basically the whole biodiversity that has been damaged because of the over-harvesting and over-tabbing, and also the removal of trees. doTERRA actually went and experimented an ancient forest that has been there for thousands of years. I mean, I don't know why they did such a thing to remove trees from their habitats and put them under greenhouses. I mean, they built big greenhouses in the hospital and they took trees and big branches of trees and they said, oh, we're going to experiment if they can grow here. These trees grow on limestone, on mountains. They don't grow under greenhouses. They're not tomatoes or salad or cabbages. So it's really shocking what they did. I mean, they had so much power because they took advantage of corrupt systems and corrupt governments. And they have used, doTERRA have used the profits and the big wealth they made from our country and our people to oppress and to basically enslave our people, which is really heartbreaking. I mean, they have to rectify every damage they have done. That's every damage. It is countless. I mean, there are communities who are really, they promised schools, they promised wells, they promised food aid. For example, they advertised all those things. They went to schools, took pictures of children without their parents' permissions. And they put them on their, they use them for promotions and say, oh, I mean, these children, they lost 10, 12 years of schooling. And doTERRA made the money, they made the profit, but these children never had school. All of those things they have to rectify. They have to rectify the food aid they said they gave to the community 1.5 million, which they advertised in 2017 and have been advertising since. Also about health, they built basically what they are calling a $4 million hospital, although I don't believe it's a $4 million. It's still in the hands of a criminal and his associates who are still using it to abuse women. Um, Even 2024, 2025, still using to abuse women. These are criminal gangs who have got guns, who've got power, who's got money. doTERRA funds all of those criminal gangs activities. They have to rectify everything. And these women on this phone here today, they want their salaries. They want to be paid full salaries because they have children, they have to look after. These women, they worked for doTERRA for 10 years and more. They were supposed to be paid not only salary, but all the other benefits like pension, other things. Still, they don't have the salary. So they really have to rectify everything. They must rectify everything. And also, doTERRA has to apologize to the community. They have to go to the community, apologize for all the wrongs they have done, all the exploitations they have done. I mean, they basically equipped a criminal gangster who ran away from the UK, a fugitive, And they knew people contacted doTERRA, send them emails, send them messages, said the guy you are giving all this money is a criminal. They completely turned the blind eye. They knew what was happening. They cannot say, oh, we didn't know. They were there every year. Their staff was there. And their staff also were part of the abuse of the of the women. Some of those women were underage. They were 15 years old that they abused. They took selfies, they took photos, they took, we have some of those. The other thing is they bribed our governments. They went into everything. They went into our politics, everything. They actually played a big game in like choosing whoever they want to be in politics. They want to be leading the country. I mean, it's something like big corporations do, but they have to rectify it. They really have to correct.
I mean, I want to follow up. That's those uh, harms are really deep, and we can understand that they're widespread and felt in the community. I want to follow up. You mentioned about salaries and pensions. Are you able to quantify for us in dollars how much the women working for the supplier are still owed?
I mean, it's a huge amount. When we calculate it, it's over $114 million when we calculate it ourselves. But we are not saying they have to pay that amount. We're saying they have to really pay, good amount to the women. I mean, we calculated over 4,000 women, 300 to $500. They said in their videos, we employ thousands. I mean, it was David is telling, he said, we employ thousands of women in the villages, in the cities, in the warehouses. He said it in his own words. He is right. There were thousands of women, these women from the villages, from the warehouses in the cities, over 10 years. And they advertised, oh, we give them $300 to $500 a month. These women want the $300 to $500 a month. When we calculate it, it's well over 100 million, just the salaries, not the pension, not the other benefits, not the injuries, not the health issues that some of the women are now struggling with. So, yeah, it's a huge amount.
And those numbers are huge, and it really underscores the true cost of what communities understood doTERRA was promising them and the cost of what they've experienced. We want to try to bring other participants into the conversation who worked for the supplier, um, but they're not able to join us on video, but they should be able to join us on phone. So we want to turn to Lowell to tell us about what was it like working for doTERRA's supplier Asli Maidi? Both what was it like sorting frankincense and the conditions that you experienced?
maad noo sheegi kartaa siday ahayd shaqaynta alaabta qaybaha doTERRA iyo aslimay iyo maxay la mid tahay kala soocidda kooxaha iyo xaaladda aad la kulantay.
And audience, you're listening to real-time translation. And just bear with us a second as Samira is on the phone with Lowell. So she'll be translating Lowell's answer shortly.
Samira, if you're interpreting for us, we'll just need you to unmute so we can hear you.
I worked oh, it's coming back to me. I worked for Asli Maid, who also worked for doTERRA. I helped them sort out the frankincense. They promised me regular pay. I still don't have no pay from them till this day. She said they promised us a lot of things. They promised opening shops, helping us out with healthcare, helping our children go to school, and we still have nothing to represent that till this day. Warehouse is okay.
Okay, we'll go to our next question. And as you notice in the chat, we just encourage people to share questions you may have in the Q&A box, and we'll get that to them in a bit. For now, we want to turn back to Alev. Uh, Corporate Accountability Lab's report details doTERRA's response to the initial investigation and the stories published by the Fuller Project and The Guardian. Can you describe that response?
Yeah, absolutely. So our report goes into some of the reasons we believe that doTERRA knew or should have known about some of what was going on before these public reports, but I'm going to set that aside for now. So the Vice News documentary came out in 2022 and leveled really serious allegations about Asli Mehdi, including a lot of what we discussed today, underpayment and deception of harvesters, as well as potential financing of terrorism. Um, doTERRA released a statement the next day, casting the documentary as sensationalized journalism. The letter that was published stated that doTERRA, and I quote, stands ready to make it right with any harvester who feels they haven't been paid fairly. But it also ended the statement, doTERRA's statement, with the decision to, quote, stand behind its business model as this was, quote, the best course of action. So we don't know if doTERRA continued to purchase from Asli Mehdi during this time, but our understanding was that their business relationship was continuing. 6 months later, the Fuller Project and Guardian articles came out. The article was about underpayment and harsh working conditions for 13 women sorters and sexual exploitation of women and girls. This time, doTERRA issued a press release stating that it had, quote, suspended operations and commenced an investigation, although it claimed that prior due diligence the company had done had not uncovered anything of substantial concern to date. So at that point, doTERRA hired the law firm, the global law firm Sidley Austin, to conduct what it called the next stage of the investigation. We don't know exactly what the first phase involved, but this Sidley Austin investigation took over 18 months. Our report highlights that we had at least two major concerns with how the investigation was conducted. So the first relates to the security of people who were asked to participate in the investigation, but I understand that we have speakers here in this webinar that are going to talk further about how participation in the investigation went for them. So I'm going to also set that aside for now. But we have detailed a lot of those concerns in our report, which you can read. Our second concern relates to the supposed independence of the investigation. So doTERRA and Sidley Austin continue to call this investigation an independent investigation, capital I, capital I. And doTERRA, yeah, and we have some serious concerns about what constitutes an independent investigation in this context, as doTERRA had commissioned it. So after 18 months, and I quote, hundreds of interviews with witnesses, as well as site visits, a review of financial records, contracts, and correspondence, such as emails, text messages, and telephone recordings. The findings that were made public from this investigation comprise 14 pages. Many of those pages are a takedown of former doTERRA contractor Anjanette DiCarlo's allegation that she was raped by Hassan, which she published. A takedown that only draws upon the alleged perpetrator's testimony and personal attacks on Anjanette, which we find deeply, utterly appalling to read. This continues to live on doTERRA's website. This published report of findings also states that other testimonies of sexual violence, quote, could not be corroborated, and only minimally acknowledges that women faced poor pay and working conditions on Asli Medi's premises without acknowledging underpayment of harvesters, and while repeatedly emphasizing that doTERRA did not know about the conduct of its supplier. So while we understand that the investigation also covered other concerns, such as misallocation of humanitarian funds, and why a school that doTERRA claims to have built does not appear to exist, there was no mention of any of those areas of investigation in the published findings. I think others will have more to say on this as well.
Yeah, that's a good segue to our next participants. We want to bring Zainab and Muna into the conversation, who have also worked in the region and with doTERRA's supplier, Asli Medi. Zainab and Muna, you were interviewed as part of the investigation that Alev just described. Can you tell us about that experience and the impact that it's had on your life? And again, we're going to do the translation here in real time because we've had some technical difficulties. And Samira, if you want to translate back as they're talking off mute, we could try it that way, or too much. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. We're just gathering their words now.
Thank you for being patient, guy. She said that she was a part of the frankincense sorting and cleaning. She was based in the city Bur'a from 2015 till 2020. She said that she was interviewed multiple times. She did work for Asli Made, but she was interviewed multiple times by doTERRA. They promised her a salary of $300 to $500. She goes, till this day, they have not been paid. She said the working conditions were horrible. They didn't even have basic necessities such as a proper toilet. She goes, the flooring was horrible. And she said that the biggest workload was in her region. She goes that they were doing the most work. The working conditions were horrible. And today she's here to basically get her rights.
I think there was a mistake there. Sorry, Samira, because it was difficult to hear. What she meant by the interview was Sarah George's interview, and not the doTERRA. So it was not. It was the final one, which was like it was on multiple times, but it was one investigation. That's
Okay.
what she was talking about.
Okay.
Thank you for that clarification, Amina. With that, we want to turn to Anasuya Siam of the Human Trafficking Legal Center. Your organization has a lot of experience with the sort of forced labor import ban that is a part of this case. Can you describe for us what a withhold release order is and the significance of the fact that one was issued in this case?
Of course. Thank you. And it's such a pleasure to be on this panel. I want to pick up a common thread that started, Casey, with your opening remarks, which is about corporate impunity being on the rise. And I think reaffirmed by the findings from Corporate Accountability Lab and the Horn of Africa organization, and what Amina has been talking about in terms of the illegal profits that were generated on the backs of these workers for years, without any of without the conditions improving, without the company taking accountability, without the industry taking accountability. So when it comes to import bans, and why Corporate Accountability Lab, the Human Trafficking Legal Center, and a lot of organizations like us are trying to leverage this as part of our legal strategy in the corporate accountability space, is because we want to get at these profits. Right? The International Labor Organization estimates that there are $236 billion in illegal profits from forced labor, right? And each year, this is just each year, and there's been a 37% increase since 2014. These estimates came out last year in 2024. So over a 10-year period, there's been a 37% rise in illegal profits from forced labor, including companies like doTERRA and others mentioned on this call that have contributed to that, right? So what tool do we have in our kit that can actually make a dent in these numbers, that can shrink the market for goods made with forced labor? If there was no market for this, if more people were aware that frankincense, for example, was made in these deplorable conditions, right, and under abusive, exploitative conditions, I don't think the companies could continue the way they are. Elav and Amina mentioned that doTERRA and these companies stand behind this business model, which is clearly not working. So these tools, we hope, at least get to a point where they dismantle the business models that allow forced labor to flourish. So an import ban, which first started in the US. The US has had an import ban for more than a century. The technical term for that is a withhold release order, which is basically a set of instructions from the US Customs Commissioner, Customs and Border Protection Commissioner, to all the officers across different US ports, letting them know that goods of a certain description are prohibited from being released into the US market because they are suspected to be made using forced labor. So once these instructions go from the customs commissioner to the port authorities, they immediately stop letting these goods in. They detain these goods at port. And this has significant repercussions, financial consequences for both the importer and the suppliers, right? And this is a legal strategy that I think organizations are increasingly pursuing because it hits the company's bottom line. We're talking money talks in all of these situations, right? Too far, we've been pursuing tools where companies just don't feel that pinch. And with an import ban and with the rising number of import bans, it's not just the United States anymore. And I see a question in the chat as well about the EU forced labor regulation, which is kind of similar to the US import ban in that it is going to prohibit the importation into EU of goods made using forced labor. And of course, this particular company has exposure to the EU market as well. The point is, if we soon have other countries closing in, making sure their markets are not havens for goods made with forced labor, I think we can reform supply chains. Some companies will feel the pressure to improve their practices and change their business models, because without consequences, without penalties, I think this is a hard sell, right? Like we've seen, voluntary measures simply have not worked. So I think I might end there. I know there are other questions, but I hope this covers kind of at a very basic level what an import ban is and kind of why it's so significant.
Thank you for that, Anasuya. And you mentioned the kind of pain that companies feel in their pockets, but I want to, remind everyone that some of the participants that we have on the call today, have, as you've heard, have really and continue to really feel pain as a result of what we're here discussing today. And so I want to go back to Zainab and ask, what are, frankincense has been a central part of your life for a long time. What are your hopes for the future? So we're going to have Samira translate that for Zainab and then translate back the answer. And so I want to just remind everyone, as we're dealing with a little bit of technical difficulties, it'll be a little quiet as Samira is gathering Zainab's words about what her hopes are for the future. And then I just also know that we have a lot of doTERRA wellness advocates on the line. And if you're moved by what you've heard today, and what you're hearing and want to learn more and get involved, please do fill out the form that we're dropping again in the chat, and we'll be in touch. Thank you again for everyone's patience and understanding.
She said that first and foremost, her hope for the future is to definitely get her rights and get what she deserves to be paid. She said there was a lot of women, and we all deserve to get paid for what we did. She goes, frankincense was a big part of my life. It's what I learned to do, is what I know what to do. But unfortunately, doTERRA needs to pay me my right. I did ask again, do you have any other hopes? And she confirmed that she wants her rights and she wants the salary that she was told that she was going to get.
Thank you. We want to bring Lowell back into the conversation. And first, I want to thank Zainab, Lowell, and Muna. It's not easy to share any part of your story with strangers, particularly really hard experiences. And so I'm deeply grateful for them joining us today for this call. And I understand, it's also very late and they're trying their best with technical difficulties to still be here and share with everyone. And so I really appreciate them being on today's webinar with us. Want to ask Lal, as we begin to wrap up our conversation here, if there's one message that she could send to doTERRA, what would it be? And I want to thank everyone on the call as well for sticking with us through some of these technical difficulties. It is a really important conversation. And we're grateful that you joined us today.
Lou says thank you very much for setting up this meeting with us today. But she said what one message I would like to say to doTERRA is I want my justice. I want my salary that was promised. I want them to retract the lies that they made up about us. They said that whenever a woman spoke up that she would lose her job. So first and foremost, I would like to get my salary and I want justice for what doTERRA has done.
Thank you so much, Lowell, Zainab, Muna, and Samira for translating for us. Um, I know many of us hope doTERRA hears the calls for healing and justice, and we know there are many more people back in your communities that are still waiting for repair and remedy from the harms that have been done. I have just one more question before we turn to the audience. Again, please put questions you have in the chat, and we hope to get to as many as we can. I want to turn to Anasuya. Your organization has pursued a number of creative solutions to ensure that corporations take responsibility for the conditions in their supply chains. Can you talk a little about the creative legal angles that you have pursued and what sort of remedy is possible?
Sure. And I think I can start by saying that import bans sit within an ecosystem of a lot of tools that organizations use. So it's not the be all and end all of corporate accountability, but it is one that we find extremely powerful in eliciting strong responses from industry and companies, right? With import bans, you're shutting off markets to goods made with forced labor. And I think that kind of tool, when complemented by mandatory human rights and environmental due diligence, by sanctions, by transparency obligations, in combination, can be really powerful in more proactively identifying forced labor risks in supply chains and ultimately leading to their remediation. Now, with the US law, as some of you may know, remedy is not baked into the statute. The statute doesn't say anywhere that you have to provide remedy and it has to be of a certain type or a certain standard. But over the years, through corporate accountability labs work, through many organizations that we collaborate with, through practice, we have seen some standards develop. In fact, since 2022, US Customs and Border Protection, which is fundamentally a law enforcement agency, right? If you think about it, they've been talking about how important it is to engage with workers and worker representatives and consult with organizations on the ground as part of a company's due diligence and more proactive approaches to identifying forced labor risks, right? And that is messaging that we have not seen publicly since at least before 2022. So over the last 3 years, including in the most recent guidance issued by US Customs and Border Protection, there's an emphasis on this element about the central role that workers and unions play in identifying forced labor risks, and they are the ones that have all the knowledge. So it's important to talk to them and understand where the risks lie. In terms of remedy, we've seen some mixed results, right? In Malaysia, we've seen a lot of success in terms of the amount that has gone out to workers who worked in Malaysia's glove industry, which was again strife with forced labor allegations, especially 3 to 4 years ago, and I'm sure continues to this day. But what the import ban did was it forced the companies to repay more than 62 million in back wages and recruitment fee reimbursements to workers in this sector. We think that number is much higher. We think that number is more than 100 million because it has had a ripple effect, right? So when one company in an industry takes action and is the target of an import ban, the logical consequence should be that other companies also sit up and take notice and realize that they have compliance risks if they continue to turn a blind eye to the forced labor risks in their supply chain. So we've seen Malaysia in terms of an emerging body of evidence of how forced labor remediation can happen, but it's far from perfect, right? We're seeing U.S. Customs and Border Protection kind of look at it. We've seen an evolution, but sometimes it seems a bit more short-sighted, where they're trying to just remedy, indicator by indicator. This is what is required in terms of looking at what is going to create lasting change. How do we make sure that forced labor does not recur, right? Remedying past harm, yes, but how do we also make sure your operations don't result in forced labor just happening in cycles, time and again? So that's something that we're mindful of and that we engage with our different US government partners on. So we hope to see a more fuller approach to forced labor remediation in the future. But I'm sure Corporate Accountability Lab may also have thoughts on it. So I definitely want to turn to you, Kessie, and also Elif to see if you want to chime in.
Alep, did you want to?
No, thank you. I thought that was a wonderful summary.
Great. Thank you for that, Anasuya, and to all our speakers today for joining us. Don't go anywhere yet, though, because we're going to turn to the audience for questions from the audience. And our first question is for Amina. Amina, has the WRO or withhold release order impacted the lives of women who worked for Asli Maidi? Oh, sorry, you're on mute, Amina. It's okay. We know it's a Zoom when someone's speaking on mute.
I mean, the withhold order has given the community hope. I mean, we were basically pursuing doTERRA for a long time with no, I mean, they were just coming back with aggressive letters and aggressive, responses, aggressive press releases. I mean, one of the worst was when the Vice News have done the documentary, they came back with a letter basically saying anybody who says anything about Asli Maidi, we're going to sue them. And that letter was written by Matthew Reed, and it was a shock. But really, the withhold release order gave the community a lot of hope. And that is why we're still here today. It's that hope that is still making us, fight and make Victoria responsible for what they have done.
Thank you. We're going to turn back to Anasua. You started to answer this in the last um, question. Just curious, do you have any more to add since the case is about forced labor? How do you think that the EU forced labor legislation will or should impact doTERRA in Europe as they also sell in Europe?
Sure, and this is a problem that we face right now because if goods are blocked from the US market, they can still be shipped anywhere else to any market that's going to accept them without these kinds of restrictions on forced labor. And we're seeing this play out already. The EU forced labor regulation hasn't the implementation for it hasn't yet started. It's going to start in 2027, but all the work that's leading up to it is happening in full swing. And one important avenue, which maybe we can partner with everybody on, is making sure that frankincense is listed as a sector with high risk of forced labor in the EU forced labor regulation database of goods made with forced labor. So the EU, under this law, has to develop a database with sectors and goods that have high risks of forced labor, which is going to inform the EU's targeting efforts, right, in terms of how to implement the law. So I think that work, a lot of that is going to happen in the next 1 or 2 years. The US and EU just concluded a trade deal, I think it was a month ago, where they committed to working with each other to promote internationally recognized labor rights and address forced labor in supply chains. So that's something to use to keep the pressure on both countries to coordinate with each other. The US already has an import ban. It already has a body of evidence and enforcement experience that it needs to share with the EU counterparts to make sure that we don't just transfer the market from the US to the EU, and companies that are subject to an import ban just don't keep, like playing a game of whack-a-mole. They just rise up somewhere else, and there's a demand that continues, right? We need to make sure that all markets are close to these goods.
Thank you for that. I want to turn to Alev for our next question. Alev, recognizing that corporations find workarounds when it comes to sourcing, can you share where doTERRA is now sourcing their frankincense from?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I actually don't know the full answer. For many years, while doTERRA was sourcing from Asli Mehdi, their supply chain was a point of a great amount of advertising. Conversations around Asli Mehdi and including videos and images of harvesters and sorters were popular fodder for doTERRA's annual conventions, for their email listservs leading up to the holidays to sell frankincense around Christmas. We've also included a number of images that were used for doTERRA advertising in our report. But since the import ban, I am not entirely sure where doTERRA has been sourcing all of its frankincense from. We know from import data that a very large import was made in August of last year, so shortly before the convention, just before some new products were released. So we believe the company had been pushing out a lot of products that were made already with this resin at that time. And since then, probably a lot of those products that have made it into the US before the ban are still in circulation. But we don't have a lot of transparency into where they're buying right now, other than one other supplier that we have seen on their website as being in Oman, I believe. It would be really interesting and helpful to know the answer to that.
Interesting. And this could be for anyone on the call. Could you share what adequate remedies could look like in this case, and what steps you believe can be taken to address the systemic issues at play?
I can start and then see if Amina has anything that she wants to add, or if any of the other women on the call want to elaborate a little bit more. Just to start with, to say, as I mentioned towards the beginning of this webinar, that the harm we're discussing is irreparable. It spans many, many years and has harmed people in a very wide, expansive territory and a large number of communities for whom this sale of frankincense is their primary source of livelihood. Nevertheless, and throughout this webinar, you've heard us sort of tally a number of different types of harms that one could quantify monetary compensation for, including lack of payment or underpayment to harvesters, including the underpayment to women who have sorted, including, we haven't really talked about it in this webinar, but there were women who participated in the Sidley Austin investigation whose names were whose names made it the next day to the foreman of the warehouse where they were working, and ultimately to Hassan, the founder and director of Asli Mehdi. And those women have incurred a great number of costs moving around regularly. As Amina mentioned in her comments, overharvesting of these trees in order to meet doTERRA's unprecedented demand caused widespread devastation of these forests, which have been around for thousands of years, which one could put a number on to even begin to try to remedy. And then in addition to all of that, there are all of these women who've experienced sexual violence. And as we know, monetary compensation for in a court case in the US for that would be quite high. But as a start to your question about process, doTERRA would really need to stop this practice that we've called obfuscation and denial, and instead actually listen to testimonies of what has happened through their supplier and actually sit down and work with the communities in order to rebuild their trust. You heard from Zainab, Muna, and Lowell that this absolutely would have to incorporate financial compensation, but it also would have to incorporate respect for these communities, beginning with an apology at a minimum, and also the space for these communities to define what their priorities are for the future and define what they believe adequate compensation would be. And so that would certainly be a starting place, but in terms of process, it's only through a process with communities in partnership that doTERRA could actually begin to remediate any of this harm. I don't know if Amina, I'm sure you have many other thoughts if there's anything you'd like to add to that.
I mean, it's really sad, as you said, that they just completely turning a blind eye and denying and lying and lying and lying, keep lying. I mean, in 2017, Chief Faisal, one of the chiefs of the areas where they said they built a boarding school, wrote them an email. And basically, that email, he said, there's no boarding school in here. There is not even a school in here. We want you to come and see with your own eyes. And they just sent him an email saying, we know it, it's there. Our staff have seen it. So basically, to this day, from that time, 2017, they're denying everything. I mean, whenever something happens, they just come up with this press release that's full of lies. Like the hospital, they said, I mean, this is a hospital they built and they're claiming 4 million, even though I don't think that the amount is anywhere near that. They basically say 4 million, and then what happened to it? To this day, I mean, there's only a press release on internet where they put it last year, 2024, I think it was December or January 2024, when their Barkhad took it back. And they said, oh, we are now basically talking with the government of Somaliland to get it back. They haven't done anything about it. It's an army barrack with 200 men basically armed to the teeth living in it, doing whatever they want, you know. And it's really, this is the thing with doTERRA. I mean, do they really, I mean, what is wrong with them? This is something we always ask ourselves. And I have no doubt that there are many other communities around the world suffering the same fate that our community has suffered. And I would say to the terrorist advocates, please keep an eye. And also, I mean, for example, the hospital was paid with money collected from wellness advocates. I mean, ask the question, what happened to our money? I mean, I don't think the terror is ever going to listen until they are humiliated or intimidated, humiliated, because their arrogance is completely blinding them. And that is the problem with arrogant people. They don't really listen unless they are embarrassed, you know, or basically humiliated in a way. And I mean, the community said so many times, we want these women, they said to the attorney they employed and gave millions, we want to talk to doTERRA. We want to solve this. I mean, I really don't understand why, but they basically came back with this report full of lies saying, oh, these women were trying to steal money. They were asking for 71 million for nothing. There are women who are living under threat. I mean, Muna, who's now here, the amount of messages she gets from Barkhad himself is unbelievable. The threats she goes, Muna, who's here, who's on this call, the threats she gets in the middle of the night, you know, messages threatening her family, threatening everything. We pass this to Aleph and other organizations working with us. I mean, what is going to happen? You know, these women live in fear. They move all the time. These movings cost money. And you know what? I don't know, really. It's just it's like they don't care what happens to these women. They did an investigation that leaked that basically made these women's identities, videos, interviews public. They gave it to him, gave it back to Asli Bailey, the man who did all of this, and they denied everything. So everything is about denial, 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 and nothing else, honestly.
Thank you for that, Amina. Honestly, yeah, or Lev, or both of you, could jump in here. Thinking of all the various legal angles available in this case, it sounds like doTERRA has built a brand around false marketing narratives. Are there legal avenues available to hold doTERRA accountable for misleading consumers? And would that be a substantial avenue?
I think our accountability lab can answer this, especially on the false and misleading claims. But I will just say, if there is evidence that doTERRA has been circumventing any of the laws, and I see a question in the chat, especially the import bans, I think under this administration, there's also been a lot of focus on trade fraud investigations. So if there's evidence that they are still importing into the United States through shipping their goods and then making sure it's entering the US in violation of the laws, there are penalties that can be imposed on any company that does something like that. And this is part of the US Tariff Act framework. And it's something that US government should seriously look into. So it's something that we advocate for in every case where we feel like there's information that a certain entity could be circumventing US trade laws. But I think there's a lot of evidence. It's a different kind of standard that is required, but it is a possibility if a company were to do that.
Thank you, Anastasia, for flagging that. Um, just to add that their accountability can look like a lot of things for corporations in situations like this, where communities and their supply chains have been exploited. And here we are taking our guidance from those communities that have been harmed, for whom the largest priority is remediation. And while it is possible to bring cases like consumer protection cases or cases around misleading consumers, and these are the types of cases that Cal does bring in various industries. Some of the weaknesses of those are that they don't always involve the kinds of financial reparations that we would want for people who are harmed. And so, yeah, these are possible tools and leverage, but we're really hoping that now that the company does know what has happened in its supply chain, which it has claimed not to have known in the past, that it will do what's right to make this right.
Thank you. I want to ask Samira to check with the women on the phone to see if any of them have any last words for our audience or for doTERRA. And while we are doing that, I just want to ask any of our other panelists. We have people on the call from really all over the world. If there's any last words that you would want to share for us to take away as we begin to wrap up our conversation. I saw someone briefly come off mute. Let's see.
That was me.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say I put a link in the chat for anyone who wants to learn more about import bans and the kind of impact they've had, and also some of the challenges with the tool. We published an article in Open Democracy last month, so feel free to take a look. And if you have any questions, I'm reachable. I think maybe my email can be shared, and I'm happy to answer any questions. But that's it for me.
The funny part of Zoom, everyone doesn't know who's going to unmute first. I'll also say I believe the link was dropped in the chat earlier, and we can drop it again, and you can find it on our website, Corporate Accountability Lab. I would really encourage you to look through the report that we published last fall. It's the culmination of quite a lot of investigation, and we tried to, as succinctly as possible, cover a wide expanse of harms that go beyond what we discussed on this call today. And if you have questions about what we discussed today, or questions arising from the report or other work that Cal has done on this, we are very available to speak with anyone, and the organizers can share our contact information with you. So thank you all for joining and for listening.
Thank you. Amina, did you want to share any last words?
I basically really I don't have any more to share, but if people want to ask us any questions, they can, or if they want to know more about people, they can always send Aleph or I think, or maybe they can go to our, we have on Facebook, we have a page that says Expose doTERRA. Oh, I thought I was muted, sorry. Yeah, we can. We have a Facebook page called Expose doTERRA, so they can go there and share their. They can join and share their questions or any more things they want to know.
Thank you. And again, Samira is talking with the women who shared their stories earlier. And are you ready, Samira, to share back?
Yeah, she
Okay, great.
firstly, Zainab has said that her last message to doTERRA is that she wants her justice. And she wants the lies that were told about the fact that they said that they were going to build hospitals and provide all this support. Like they need to admit that they did not like they did not keep their promise. And Mona has said that she also would like her justice and she would like the salary that she was promised first and foremost, but also doTERRA sent people to interview them, and she doesn't know what they answered the questions that they needed to be answered, but whoever that went back to, they were threatened. She goes, I'm still getting threatened till this day, and she wants her justice.
Thank you for that. And in the chat, there's a petition, which is an important concrete step that everyone can do today to show their solidarity with the workers and the communities that have been impacted. And so I encourage everyone to sign that and circulate it. And please follow all the organizations that have been a part of this discussion so you can continue to support the workers who are still fighting for justice and will continue to fight for the justice until they've achieved it. So I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us, the audience for joining us. It's really hard one to share these stories of abuses that they've experienced, and it's hard for us to hear it, and it underscores how a company's involvement in a community can leave a legacy that carries on for years until measures are taken to go back and address the harm that was caused. If you're one of the doTERRA's wellness advocates who joined us today, please do fill out the form we've shared in the chat if you're interested in learning more. And for all of you, we'd encourage you to join our mailing lists. We work with communities in the US and around the world to fight for human rights and to build the governing structures that protect those rights and support thriving communities. Please stay tuned as our next webinar in this series is coming soon, and we're excited to share a victory that underscores the importance of transparency and the power of workers organizing and solidarity campaigns that span borders. And once again, thank you for all of our panelists who joined from really all over the world for sharing your stories. We stand with you. We're here to support you until you have achieved justice. And thank you so much for everyone who joined us today. Thank you.